I've clicked onto the global tropical area for July the 19th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, the flood expression are mine alone. If you're going to make any decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to the local office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we've got a couple of disturbances to watch over the next several days in the West Pacific. We've got Invest 91W here, sitting off the coast of the western Philippines and is entering the South China Sea this morning. It is forecast to come up towards the coast of southern China and may develop into a tropical storm before making landfall there. We also got 92W well east of the central Philippines, and this is tracking northwest and will be continuing this motion for the next several days up until it gets to the vicinity of Japan, Taiwan, and eastern China. And once it gets here, it could be a significant storm, and we'll talk about this one a lot in this video. But we're going to first touch on briefly Invest 91W, as the system has just come off the Philippines. After passing over those islands for the past couple of days, you can see that the center is likely somewhere west of the Philippines in the South China Sea now. You can see that if you look at the low-level cloud motion, we've got westerly winds on the south side of the convection, turning into southerly winds over the central Philippines, and then they're turning into easterly winds further north. So you would imagine in this case, you have the low somewhere here underneath this convection. Now, this center underneath this convection does not look overly well defined. ASCAP passes have not been particularly helpful, but from the data that we've seen on those, it doesn't really seem all too well defined. And it's hard to pick out if there's any northerly flow on the west side, though it may easily be hidden by the convection. But right now, the system is likely not meeting the criteria of a tropical cyclone, though it doesn't really matter, as either way, we're getting lots of convection blowing up here over the center, and that's bringing a lot of heavy rainfall, or it was over the Philippines. Now it's moving over the South China Sea. But this system will likely still have a chance to develop in the South China Sea at some point, as the environment is forecast to be fairly favorable. This is the upper level wind plot from the GFS. You can see that as the system gets more into the northwestern South China Sea, this is by Saturday, or I think this will be early Sunday local time, we have a fairly light upper level flow. We don't really have any big areas of troughiness or big strong highs to rip apart any storm that develops here. It's fairly light, and the wind shear as a result is light. Most modeled soundings less than 10 knots. And this should favor, alongside the warm sea surface temperatures here, gradual development into a tropical cyclone with this system, and guidance is in pretty good agreement that this will happen somewhere in the northwestern South China Sea. Now, where the restriction comes in is with 92W. You can see that at the same time, 92W is forming east of the Philippines, and it's beginning to build its upper level high, which will help it intensify later on in its life. And as it does that, we're beginning to get increased easterly flow into the South China Sea. So that you see, and the system is going to be here. It's going to disappear, but it'll remain in the northwestern South China Sea on the model. And you can see where it is. We get this increased easterly fetch of wind from this upper high that is draped over 92W. And this begins to shear the storm and really keeps it in check for intensity. Now, this doesn't seem to be a inhibitive shear. This looks to be more moderate, and the storm could easily still remain a tropical storm in this, though it will probably be lopsided with all the convection being on the western and northern sides of the storm. But you can see on the models like the GFS, we still have that little compact signature coming in here between, say, Hainan and Hong Kong in China, and this could easily bring some heavy rainfall and tropical storm force winds to that part of the coastline, depending exactly where it comes ashore. And you can see the European is also fairly similar, keeping it either a tropical depression or a tropical storm on the model until it comes ashore. But it does look like this is going to be limited in terms of how strong it can get thanks to 92W, and we're really not going to look at a very strong system out of this. Now, the same cannot be said for Invest 92W, which you can see here as the sun rises east of the Philippines. We've got an area of concentrated thunderstorm activity, a little bit more concentrated than we've seen over the past couple of days, in the middle of what is a trough axis extending across really the entire Philippine Sea. You can see it if you look at the low-level cloud motion. We've got westerly winds coming out of the southern Philippines over Palau. Then they don't turn into easterly winds until you get way out here south of islands like Guam, And then at that point, they continue west or easterly winds until about Luzon. So you've got a trough axis about like this, and this is an elongated area of low pressure. And what this spells for 92W is it's got some work to do. It doesn't have a well-defined, compact area of low pressure. It doesn't have anything coherent going for it. But one thing that it is doing right is it's getting this more concentrated convection in the center of this trough axis. And what this can do is this can help close off a more coherent low. And this is what's expected by a lot of model guidance. You can see this if we look at the GFS. This is the low-level vorticity or spin plot. And you can see by Friday local time, we have now an area of low pressure being closed off on this model. And the European shows the same. I could show you that real quick. It shows the same, a more closed area of low pressure developing. That would be, I believe, Friday evening local time. And that's in pretty short lead time, really, that compared to what models had been anticipating a couple days ago. The models have been consistently for the past few days saying that the system would finally develop around Luzon. It would struggle up until then, and then it would get its act together east of Luzon. But now we're looking at maybe tonight or tomorrow morning local time, this system has a coherent low going for itself, and the system could be well on its way to becoming a tropical cyclone by that point. So we're a little bit of ahead of schedule here with 92W. And this does have some implications on the long-range intensity forecast for the system, as if the system is a tropical cyclone for longer, the environment is going to be just favorable for continued development and intensification of the system. And it could potentially spell more intensification if it does get its act together in shorter lead time than models had anticipated. You can see the low shear environment already with this system. This is the water vapor loop, and you can see that we have expanding upper level cirrus clouds in all directions from this system. And this is a low shear environment. There's no trough, there's no ridge that's going to be shearing the system apart. And this type of a pattern is forecast to persist over the next couple of days as this system moves further northwest. And you can see this on the GFS ensemble. So this is the GFS ensemble, which is about 31 members of different runs of the GFS. This is all those averaged out into one upper level wind plot. And you can see here's 92W by this time east of the Luzon Straits. And now we've got a expanding upper level high with low shear and high divergence right on top of 92W. And this would favor the system intensifying alongside the sea surface temperatures being very warm for this time of year. You can see that we have 30 to 31 degrees Celsius waters pretty much all the way up until the southern Japanese islands. And even then, you don't get below 30 degrees Celsius until you get close to eastern China. So this system really has all the environmental factors and oceanic factors going for it. Now, one thing that could be of a limit is that ocean heat content, which is a measure of how deep the warmth extends with depth. That does begin to get limited once you get north of, say, the island of Taiwan on that latitude. And that could limit the system, as this will be a very broad system. This isn't going to be, say a compact, small typhoon. This is probably going to be a little bit bigger of a typhoon than you would normally deal with because it is spawning from a long trough axis like we talked about a little bit ago. But it could still absolutely intensify before that oceanic heat content comes down. And you'll see on GFS model forecast that this happens. The GFS intensifies this very significantly. This would be a really bad storm for the area if this did come to pass. And the European, with its afternoon run today, came out and it's now intensifying it at a pretty quick rate. And 973, for the European model to be showing intensification like that, when the GFS and European are agreeing on this, you've got something on the way. And the European, it can sometimes go weak. So when you have it getting strong like this, you realize, all right, that is a signal you need to pay attention to. Now, the main question now is, where is the system going to track? And is there anything that could be a hindrance to it? So we talked about it's going to have a low shear environment and the sea surface temperatures are warm. There could be one thing that brings maybe a little bit of shear to it. There is forecast to be this little upper trough here over the southern Japanese islands, and some models have tried to cut this off into a little bit of an upper low. On some runs like the GFS Ensemble, this actually just lifts out because of the upper ridge that we have building on top of 92W. But some models do have this dug in a little bit more, and it's allowed to pinch off into an upper level low over portions of southern China, and then it just backs towards the south and west. Now, while that could bring some shear to the system, unfortunately, this flow on the eastern side of this low would be aligned with where the storm is going, as we're going to be having an area of high pressure off towards the east, pretty much bringing the system north its entire life. And alongside that, studies have found that a upper low like this that could be backing away from a tropical cyclone can actually be more favorable in terms of increased upper level divergence as well. At least that's one factor of it. So it doesn't look like this trough is going to be a big hindrance. And if it does bring any shear, one thing about it being a bit of a larger storm is those larger storms are able to fend off wind shear better than smaller systems. They're more resilient to that shear. So even if this trough here brings, even moderate wind shear values, that's probably not going to be enough to keep this system from intensifying. Now, in terms of the actual track, in the short term, we're probably going to see the storm slow down once it gets east of Luzon. The reason being is that we have a high here over the southern Japanese islands, and this is trying to force the system towards the west-northwest, but we've got strong easterly flow, or westerly flow, coming from that westerly wind burst that we've had ongoing for the past several days, I think over a week now in the West Pacific. And these two flows are going to sort of compete with each other, so we're not really going to get a westerly or easterly component with this, but they do both have northerly components, so that's where the storm's going to track, but that's not going to be a very fast motion. But eventually, we're going to get this bridge to weaken, and this will open the door for the system to come up here through, say, Taiwan and the southern Japanese islands, and you can see that happen here on the GFS Ensemble, where we have this high here, this trough here, and the system's path is up towards the north. And this seems to be a pretty high confidence forecast, at least for now. Now, exact details on which island it could hit here in Japan, if it hits Taiwan, even if it goes into, say, eastern China, those details are a little bit more murky, and we won't know that for several days, as this is getting beyond the 5-day forecast. And for areas like China, this could be 7 days or longer before the system actually gets its center towards you all. But the general idea from model guidance right now is that it is likely to be in the vicinity of the southern Japanese islands and Taiwan as we get into the middle part of next week. Earlier middle part of next week is the current timing on this. And again, with the environment, there's not much shear that is forecast to keep this system from intensifying. So all systems look go for this to intensify unless it has some struggles internally, which models will not catch. We'll have to see that in real time. But this is certainly something to pay attention to in Japan, China, and Taiwan, and even in the Philippines as well, as the system is going to be broad, so you're going to still get some impacts here, even if the eye stays well offshore. And this is a great time to review your cyclone preparedness kit. And just make sure you're prepared for when the system does come through. And if it doesn't come through your exact area, but you're still prepared, that's great. We're heading into peak typhoon season, so we need to be prepared for any storm that may come our way. But I'll have more videos throughout the rest of this week and into next week on the system as it comes north. But we're going to talk briefly about what to expect in the East Pacific, as we do have some activity there for the rest of the video. This is the wide view of the East Pacific, and there's really not much going on. The East Pacific has been very quiet this season. I think we're actually at the quietest East Pacific hurricane season on record, or at least in the satellite era, since I don't know what year would have been more inactive like this. I mean, we've had one tropical storm form, and that was a very weak storm, and we just had another system try to develop, and it failed to because it ran out of time with the seasonal temperatures. You can see that little spin here way up there, and that's Invest 92E. That system failed to develop into any tropical cyclone. It ran into the 26-degree isotherm. Now, we do have one area of interest. There's forecast to be an area of low pressure that develops off the coast of Mexico over the coming days, and it could have a chance to develop, but this system is forecast to remain offshore, and odds don't look overly high for this system either to develop. The NHC only gives the system about a 20% chance of developing, and those are not high odds at all. And from what I've seen, model guidance is not too keen on this system either on developing. So who knows when we'll get our next system in the East Pacific. But I'm sure we're all enjoying the quiet after the hurricane season that we had last year in the East Pacific. So this quiet period is certainly appreciated. That's all that I've got for today. Again, I'll have more uploads on the West Pacific systems throughout the rest of this week and into next week. That's all that I've got for today. Thanks for watching.